Hey everyone, and welcome to my review for Amazon's The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2, A Shadow of the Past and Adrift. Well, here we are, finally discussing the immensely expensive Amazon production exploring the Second Age of Middle-earth. For those unfamiliar with my reviews, I tend to avoid recaps and go right into my top 5 moments, followed by criticisms and a final score. But before getting into all that, I just want to give my general thoughts after watching the first 2 episodes. And honestly, I didn't love it. It really pains me to say that, as I feel I had very fair expectations going in. I mostly ignored the conversations about this show before now, because people seem to be going way too far in favor and against the Rings of Power before even seeing it. So I went in, ready to give it a fair shot, and without any expectations that it would be accurate to the books. I knew right away it would be totally different, and was ready for that, so it's not the changes that actually bother me. In fact, I agree with many of the changes and simplifications they made, as there's no way to reproduce a world as deep and interconnected as the one from the books, and in some places I think they made the right call. So none of that was my issue. To me, what just became increasingly obvious by the end of the second episode is that the show, so far, is quite boring. I couldn't believe I got bored, and actually thought about skipping over parts, something I never thought would happen in a Lord of the Rings production. I know a lot of people didn't like the Hobbit films and found them boring, but I didn't. I loved them, and most of the changes in those movies didn't bother me very much at all. Even in the final seasons of Game of Thrones, when the show was in obvious decline, I was never really bored. They still found ways to keep my attention, but this show, so far, has not. Obviously, there's a lot more to say about this, and it certainly wasn't all bad. So let's start with the positives by getting into the top 5 moments of the night, with an honorable mention going to the scene where the boy in the Southlands found the sword with the mark of Sauron. I think this storyline has a lot of potential, as I'm hoping he will eventually join the armies of the Dark Lord and rise through the ranks, giving us a glimpse into that world. Now, for the 5th best moment of the episode, I went with the elf Arondir visiting a Southland village and his romantic partner, the human woman Bronwyn. This requires some explanation, because when I first saw this, I actually didn't like it at all. The confrontation in the tavern was okay, but I thought the cliché forbidden love romance between the elf and human was an unnecessary addition, which is kind of how I felt with the romance between Kili and Tauriel in the Hobbit movies, one of the few things I didn't like from those films. However, this quickly changed for me when a story from the books came to mind. I have no idea if this is where they're going with it, or if the similarities are just a coincidence, but in the books, there's a lesser-known romance between an elven man and a human woman that I always really enjoyed, and that was when the elf Aegnor met Andreth, a human wise woman and lore-keeper from the House of Beor. Aegnor was the son of Finarfin and brother of Galadriel, but not the brother from the show, as in the books her family is different. Although Aegnor and Andreth fell in love, the elves were at war with Morgoth, and by tradition, Aegnor could not marry until peacetime. But with no peace in sight, the years of war dragged on, and while Aegnor felt he could not marry Andreth, neither did he consider being with any other woman, as elves in this world, for the most part, only loved one person throughout the entirety of their immortal lives. And even if that person died, they did not seek another partner. There are exceptions, of course, but this is generally why a relationship between an elf and a human is dangerous, because after a few years, the human will die and the elf will linger on alone, never able to love another for the rest of their immortal existence. Whether or not this sacrifice is worth it is up to each individual person, but Aegnor obviously thought it was, since he remained faithful to Andreth, who loved him back just as fiercely. Unfortunately, Aegnor died in the Battle of Sudden Flame, and so they never wed, leaving Andreth only with the memories of her beloved, while she lived out the rest of her mortal life. Meanwhile, since Aegnor was immortal, at some point he was reborn in a new body, and likely lived the rest of his existence never able to love again. If this is the story that inspired what they're doing with Arondir and Bronwyn, then I think it has enormous potential. However, it's entirely possible I'm making this connection up in my head, and they're entirely unrelated. Either way, for now, it made me love this scene. For the number 4 spot, I went with Elrond having dinner with Durin and his wife. Unfortunately, there was a lot about the dwarves I didn't like, as I found their silliness more dumb than fun. But this scene I actually found quite entertaining, mostly because of the cute relationship between Durin and Disa. I thought our first look at a dwarven woman was done quite well, portraying Disa as fun and warm, but also hard-headed and intelligent. It was all great stuff. Durin being upset over not seeing Elrond in 20 years felt kind of silly to me, as dwarves lived for several centuries, so it really wasn't all that long in my opinion, but I did enjoy seeing Elrond flex his diplomatic skills and resolve the issue. For the 3rd best moment of the episodes, I chose the hobbits finding the man who fell from the sky. I don't know how you guys felt about the Harfoot scenes in these first 2 episodes, but for me, I love them. I can honestly say that the Harfoots are my favorite part of this entire show, and I would be happy to watch an entire hour all about them and Nori's adventures. This was something I didn't expect, as the hobbits are part of the Third Age, and in the books aren't part of the Second Age at all. But after having seen it, I think they made the right choice, because including the hobbits was an excellent addition. I wasn't sure how to feel about the man falling from the sky, but I think I enjoyed it as well. Since there are so many changes from the books, predicting what will happen seems impossible to me. So I have no idea who this person is. I thought maybe this was their way of introducing Gandalf or another Maiar, but I actually enjoy not knowing, and I like how they're showing his magical abilities while hinting at a darkness within. No idea where this is going, but I'm really enjoying it so far. For the second best moment, I went with Elron's discussion with Kelebrimbor in Eregion. I chose this scene almost entirely because they showed Feanor's hammer and discussed the Silmarils. For me, Feanor is one of the best characters in this universe, and the wars of the First Age over the Silmarils is the most interesting time period. So even getting a small glimpse into this fascinating past, for me, was enough to absolutely love this scene. It was also cool seeing them plan the forge that'll make the Rings of Power. Finally, for the best moment of episodes 1 and 2, I went with the opening to episode 1. Although I wasn't all that interested in the very first thing we saw being the scene between Galadriel and her brother, what came next was something I've wanted to see for much of my life, and that was a visual representation of the War of Wrath, the final battle against Morgoth, where flying dragons fought great eagles in the skies above, while the armies of the Dark Lord and host of Valinor engaged on the ground. For those familiar with this time period from the books, you may have noticed the many changes and simplifications they made in these opening scenes. How they didn't mention the factionalism of the elves, the kinslaying, or Feanor's betrayal of his sibling. They also seem to be using Galadriel's brother as an amalgam of all the different brothers and cousins she lost throughout the First Age. In the books, all her brothers died fighting early on, as did most of her family, and thus didn't live to see the final battle. So it looks like they're simplifying everything by giving her one brother to stand for all the rest and streamline the story. Honestly, these changes and the many more they made in episode 1 really didn't bother me. In fact, I actually thought a lot of the changes they made early on made sense, and were absolutely necessary for the sake of translating a complex work of fantasy to film or TV. And because these changes didn't bother me, I was able to fully enjoy this opening scene, and was utterly captivated seeing the War of Wrath play out before my eyes, and seeing Beleriand shattered in that cool red shot. I love this, and it gave me great hope that this show might be good. That hope may not have paid off by the end of episode 2, but that doesn't change how much I enjoyed the opening. So those were my top 5 moments. And while I did enjoy those scenes, as well as much of episode 1, the sad truth is, I found episode 2 barely watchable. And it all started to go downhill for me at the end of episode 1, when Galadriel jumped from the ship headed to Valinor. This was so unbelievably ridiculous that I found it hard to believe they actually went in this direction. Not only did this make no sense, it made me lose all respect for the character of Galadriel, who up to this point I was actually enjoying. Obviously lots of changes were made to the Galadriel character, but throughout episode 1, I actually thought they nailed her attitude, as in addition to being brilliant and beautiful, she was a stubborn, rebellious elf all her life. So seeing her look of crazed determination and refusal to accept what the others wanted was great. Although I didn't like her saying she was eager to go home, because in the books, she wanted to stay in Middle-earth and found her own realm. That was the biggest reason she came in the first place, and I think it works much better as a motivation for the character. But aside from that, I thought they were making her very interesting and sympathetic. It all then came together when she had that scene with Elron, where she said she would refuse the call to Valinor. I loved this, as that's what happened in the books, and I loved seeing her be firm and stand by her convictions. But then they ruined it all for me by having her backtrack and get on the ship just to jump out in the middle of the ocean like an absolute idiot. Honestly, I don't know if I will ever be able to like this character again, because for all of episode 2, every single scene with Galadriel in the ocean held no interest for me whatsoever, and I found myself looking at my phone or wanting to skip over those parts. The funny thing is, her jumping into the ocean did remind me of a story from the books, where the Elf King Amroth was planning to go west to Valinor with his beloved Nimrodel, but they were separated and the ship took off without her. When Amroth realized they left without his wife, he jumped from the ship and tried to swim back to shore, but drowned and was never seen again. That was a beautiful, tragic story I really enjoyed from the books, and having that come to mind while watching Galadriel foolishly throw herself from a ship, knowing full well she can't be killed off from this show, it was just too much for me to accept. If this was any other show other than a Lord of the Rings production, I would have stopped watching right there. This was primarily the reason I found episode 2 so boring, but it wasn't the only reason, as I also found most of the dwarf scenes uninteresting, especially the pointless contest of strength between Elrond and Durin. This was another moment I found myself wanting to skip ahead. Although there were other things I didn't like as well, my lack of interest in the dwarf and ocean scenes are really what made me hesitant to keep watching this show. I will keep watching it, and making reviews for now, but honestly the next few episodes will have to be exceptional if they want to keep my interest. I haven't looked for any other reviews of the show, as I wanted to give my thoughts without outside influence, so I don't know if people are liking or hating it so far, but for me, it's just boring. Overall, I gave episode 1 a 7 out of 10. It would have been higher, like maybe an 8 or 8.5, because like I said earlier, I really enjoyed much of it, and wasn't bothered by most of the changes, but the final Galadriel scene lowered it to a 7. Then for episode 2, my score dips down to a 4 out of 10, with the 4 points it earned almost entirely coming from the Hobbit scenes I really enjoyed. So that's it for my review of The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2. What did you guys think? Do you agree with my less than stellar review? Do you disagree? Do you like this adaptation? Or was it even worse than I described? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, be sure to check out my spoiler-free Prelude to the Rings of Power video, as well as my spoiler-filled videos about the Rings of Power, Kingdom of Numenor, and Second Age, which go all over the events of this period in detail. Links found below. So thank you very much for watching, and that's it for now. I'll see you in the next one. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and check out the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.